It's important to understand first that Colombia is kind of, it's a bit of a cliche to say this, but it's really two countries. So in cities like Bogota or Medellin, it's very developed. You have quite strong economic integration. Quality of living is much higher, and then in rural regions, you have some rural regions that have almost no state presence. Very poor development. They're not integrated into either regional or national economies. So I think that's the first thing to understand to see how peace is being implemented. And those regions have been kind of most conflict affected. So those are also really important places for the state to reestablish services, reestablish its effective presence in this kind of post-peace landscape. And in many of those places, the state has been ineffective. So for example, in the Southwest, in a municipality called Tumaco, very conflict affected, but we've seen really kind of dramatic increases in violence or dramatic acts of violence, a real inability of the state to kind of address that insecurity and also reestablish a presence. And even this week, a survey came out that had residents of Tumaco being very kind of discouraged and pessimistic about how peace process implementation has gone. And that might not be the case for other regions, for example, in Antioquia, or that have experienced conflict, but maybe have not seen kind of increases of violence after the peace accord was signed. Right, so peace has been kind of going in fits and starts, so we have seen some really significant steps towards peace. So the FARC have turned in all of their weapons, which is a massive step forward, obviously. And the ratio of arms to combatants is one of the highest in peace processes in the past, which kind of shows a real demonstrated commitment to peace on the part of the FARC. They've registered their political party. They've put forward candidates for Congress and for the presidency. So in terms of kind of the end of the conflict, it's clear that the conflict with the FARC, as it has been for the past 52 years that it existed, has ended. With that said, though, there have been some real issues with how other programs of the peace laid out in the peace accord have been implemented. So, for example, reintegration of former FARC combatants is going extremely slowly, and that's very worrying. You've seen more than half of FARC combatants leave those designated camps, either to go back to their towns or possibly to join dissident groups, things like that. So there are some definite steps forward, and there have been some positive signs, but with that said, the UN, for example, has issued concerns that parts of it are going far too slowly, and it's just kind of a mixed bag. I think how this peace process goes, and particularly how it goes in the next few months to a year, are extremely consequential for the future of peace in Colombia. Issues like reintegration and social economic reintegration are both time sensitive and very important to see how violence will turn into peace in Colombia. So former FARC combatants need an incentive to leave behind illegal economies and to leave behind kind of violence to see that there's an alternate way, and if they don't, you'll see them being more likely to join FARC dissident groups or other criminal organizations that are active in regions that were formerly held by the FARC. And you've already seen that happen. So overall in Colombia, the homicide rate has declined, but in certain municipalities, particularly in rural areas, it's actually increased by a massive amount. And that's due to other groups moving in and trying to fill this vacuum by the FARC, particularly the ELN, which is another guerrilla group that's active in Colombia, and the Clan de Usaga, which is a criminal organization that's very powerful and very violent, have either begun the process of peace negotiations, as in the case in the ELN, or made kind of overtures to the government to say that they're willing to enter into negotiations, as the Clan de Usaga has done. And they are very much looking towards how this process is going with the FARC to see what their future might be, how they'll negotiate, what sort of conditions they'll ask for, and whether they really will leave kind of the criminal economy nexus. Well, it's interesting because if you look at recent polls of the Colombian electorate, peace doesn't rank very highly in terms of issues they're worried about. So corruption, health services, education, those are the top three concerns, and then peace comes fourth or fifth. But that said, you've seen kind of the candidates ally based on a similar split as the plebiscite for peace last year. So there's a kind of grand alliance that's starting to form, a grand coalition among the parties that supported the no vote, which was the no against the peace accord. And then you've seen candidates on the left side of the spectrum explore coalitions and talk a bit about peace. So one of the main candidates, Humberto de la Calle, has talked a lot about forming a coalition to support the peace process. But peace itself has not emerged as a main theme that candidates are talking about in the election. They've really been talking more about corruption and kind of day-to-day issues like that. So it's interesting. No one wants to say that it's an election about the peace process because it's a very explosive topic, but it's clear that it's really one of the main drivers behind how the coalitions have been shaping up. Well, President Santos has really staked his legacy on the peace process, and I think however he's seen is very much going to depend on how the peace process is seen as going. Colombia is very polarized right now. His predecessor, Alvaro Uribe, has been very, very critical. And so there's a wide swath of population that supports Uribe and has been critical of Santos, and then a wide swath of population that recognizes what Santos has done in negotiating this peace process. But I think it's definitely too early to tell to see what his legacy will be. It very much rides on how this peace process goes, both as he closes out his term and then in the future. Mm-hmm.